Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never practice nunchucks in a crowded room. Never eat chole before a road trip. Always take your shirt off before you iron it. Don't take a call near a swimming pool. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Hi and welcome to this episode of ThePrint Security Code. We're going to be looking in this episode at the still unfolding scandal involving an alleged attempt by India's external covert service, the Research and Analysis Wing, to assassinate the Khalistani propagandist Gurpatwant Singh Pannu. My colleagues Vandana Menon has visited the alleged perpetrator's house in Haryana. We've had reporters visiting locations in Delhi and elsewhere chasing this story. And all of this journalism, which I'm sure you've watched, costs money. So my periodic appeal to you is to please take a subscription to ThePrint, continue your support to our channel, but also please support our journalism by subscribing at the link in the description below. Finish him now, finish him, brother, finish him off. Don't take too much time. The message from New Delhi pleaded. Push these guys, push these guys. From a flat in the capital's middle-class Vasant Kunj neighborhood, an import-export dealer had reached out to a drug dealer in New York to hire a hitman to assassinate a lawyer living in a plush apartment on the 59th floor of the Empire State Building. And now, the Indian spy who'd allegedly organized the $15,000 advance to be paid for the hit was demanding delivery. Everything seemed set, except the drug dealer was a snitch for the Drug Enforcement Administration, America's federal anti-narcotics agency, and the hitman who had received the payment in crisp $100 bills was an undercover officer. The alleged plot to kill Khalistan propagandist and lawyer Gurpatwant Singh Pannu, for which prosecutors in the United States have indicted New Delhi businessman Nick Gupta and former Research and Analysis Wing officer Vikash Yadav, had all the comic elements of an old-fashioned, bumbling Bollywood cop movie. For India's External Intelligence Service, though, this case is arguably the biggest debacle in its history. It raises hard questions about whether R&AW is truly prepared to stage operations under the gaze of hostile agencies overseas. Even setting aside diplomatic embarrassment, the allegation suggests breathtaking lapses in communication security, amateurish handling of sources, and poor tradecraft. In this episode of ThePrint Security Code, we'll be looking at how this crisis came about and what it teaches us. Long before Prime Minister Narendra Modi took office in 2014, National Security Advisor Ajit Doval had been advocating for the intelligence services to engage in more covert action against adversaries. In a 2012 article for the Indian Police Journal, Doval called for, I quote, a low-cost sustainable offensive with high deniability aimed to bleed the enemy to submission. Later, Doval elaborated the underlying reasoning in a speech. Again, I quote, wars have ceased to be effective instruments for achieving political or military objectives. They are too expensive and unaffordable. And basically, that meant covert action was needed to achieve what conventional conflicts couldn't. This mandate wasn't alien to R&AW. The agency had staged highly successful covert operations in Bangladesh in the build-up to the 1971 war, using the crack establishment 2-2 secret force to harry Pakistan's army. During the inter-services intelligence-backed Khalistan terrorist campaign from 1981 to 1993, RAW had set up CITX, an elite unit, to conduct retaliatory bombings in Pakistan, according to a book by former top R&AW officer B. Raman. Few senior officers in R&AW, though, embraced covert action with the same enthusiasm as Doval. Current Deputy NSA and former R&AW Chief Rajinder Khanna who led the agency from 2014 to 16, is believed to have been a little skeptical of plans to set up a new covert station in Iran, for example, to target Balochistan. Khanna is said to have argued that the individuals involved did not have the right training. Sources familiar with these operations told the print. And even when operations were successful, the outcomes weren't always as anticipated. R&AW's Pakistan desk head R. Kumar, once a contender for the top job, succeeded in providing pinpoint coordinates for the Jaish-e-Mohammed seminary bombed by India after the 2019 Pulwama attack. Errors in targeting, though, meant that the seminary remained undamaged, while the crisis escalated to dangerous levels for both countries. And a botched attempt to kidnap fugitive diamond merchant Mehul Choksi ended in embarrassment for the government, with local courts in the Caribbean ruling that he had been subjected to torture and kidnapped illegally. The still ongoing legal proceedings involving a St. Kitts diplomat with close links to the government and two British Punjabis have led to disclosures that could damage future Indian efforts to extradite criminal suspects from foreign jurisdictions. Fights within the security establishment brought even more unwelcome attention to R&AW, raising questions about the professionalism of the Indian Police Service or IPS officers who had come to dominate the organization. The reason for bringing in large numbers of IPS officers on deputation was the Rabinder Singh spy scandal in 2003, which had led the government of the day to conclude that R&AW's in-house cadre or the research and analysis service was too compromised to be trusted with sensitive tasks. But the IPS, as we'll see, wasn't necessarily the solution. Former Central Bureau of Investigation or CBI officer Ajay Kumar Bassi alleged in the Supreme Court that his agency intercepted conversations between former R&AW chief Samant Goel and banker Somesh Prasad, warning the Dubai-based fugitive not to return to India at any cost. Senior R&AW officials told the print that Goel was actually seeking to insulate R&AW from the consequences of the litigation, as Somesh Prasad and his brother Manoj Prasad had long handled overseas bank accounts that the organization used for its covert operations. The accounts, the sources said, had originally been set up by the banker's brother's father, Dineshwar Prasad, who worked for RAW. Goel needed to step in to help these guys, one senior officer said, because the organization's interests were involved. In doing so, the officer said, he showed a high level of commitment to the agency, but also indiscretion because things like this should never be discussed over the air, no matter how secure you think your phone line is. Large numbers of Indian Police Service officers now serving in RAW don't have the long experience of covert life or the skills it needs to operate in a hostile environment, another senior R&AW officer said. They're just a few months training away from a life where they were the rulers of their district and could pretty much say what they liked or do what they liked and get away with it. The habits of a lifetime, this officer told me, are hard to unlearn. Even though RAW has significantly expanded its resources, like its cadre of regional language experts, and hired many junior personnel familiar with foreign jurisdictions, relatively few of its IPS leadership level possess long-term experience in covert operations. There's no point in playing spy if your only experience of the world is operating under the protection of diplomatic cover, the officer I spoke to added. Failures in tradecraft, the skill set on which intelligence officers rely for their survival, run through the indictment filed by prosecutors in New York. Yadav and Gupta are alleged to have openly discussed the plot to murder Pannu, as well as the killing of Sikh separatist leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar, evidently convinced that their encrypted messaging application was secure. However, as even ordinary citizens familiar with the Pegasus surveillance scandal would know, no electronic communication is guaranteed to be safe from the prying eyes of intelligence services of foreign nation states. More important, it's not clear why you would want to discuss a murder plot over the phone or WhatsApp if the two people concerned both lived in Delhi and just a few minutes' drive from each other. Fears have been voiced within R&AW, moreover, that Yadav's indiscreet conversations might even have allowed the DEA to harvest information not only that shared between Gupta and Yadav, but also among the intelligence officers' bosses. Following the payment of the advance, the indictment records that Yadav asked for proof that the hitman was surveilling Pannu to prepare for their attack. He received images of Pannu's neighborhood with GPS coordinates, material that, as I'm sure all of you know, is readily available off the internet. Excellent and evidently naive, Yadav allegedly responded. They are proving that they are quite serious now. Little effort seems to have been made by Yadav or his superiors to verify the reliability of Gupta's drug dealer contact in the first place, despite a string of recent cases revealing that the DA has heavily infiltrated narcotics cartels. Two police sources said that the DA might well have had a prior interest in Gupta, who is listed in the indictment as communicating with the drug dealer in English punctuated with Spanish phrases. Why are the Spanish phrases important? Well, obviously, because it shows Gupta had a long history of dealing with people in the Latin American dominated drug world. Gupta, the indictment alleges, provided Yadav with access to the drug dealer in exchange for help in quashing potential criminal proceedings in Gujarat. The case, one police officer said, concerned unproven allegations of payments made to Gupta for people smuggling through Mexico, an activity which is also conducted by drug cartels and a long standing subject of deep interest to the DEA. Finally, Gupta was allowed to leave India for the Czech Republic, where he was eventually arrested by the DEA 2 weeks after the murder plot failed to materialize. A professional officer should never have allowed someone like Gupta to visit an area where he could be apprehended by Western law enforcement, one raw officer told me. The real questions Indians should be asking, the officer added, are why is such poor tradecraft countenanced? How good are Raw's procedures? What are the standards of its recruitment? And what is the robustness of senior officer oversight over operations? As the print revealed on Saturday, Yadav had worked as a probationer in R&AW for 9 whole years before finally going to court and securing a permanent appointment. 2 months after the Gupta indictment became public, the documents show, he was appointed a full-time senior field officer at R&AW's sister image intelligence gathering agency, the Aviation Research Center. This would suggest he left an earlier job to join R&AW, but we have no idea of what criteria were used to select him and what monitoring there was of his career after that period. The one man who knows the answers to the many mysteries surrounding the Pannu case is the affable, smiling former spy master Samant Goel, a veteran of the Punjab Police's counter-terrorism operations, who led RAW for 4 years from 2019 and placed covert action against Khalistanis at center stage. Late one summer night at the beginning of June, a former R&AW officer found himself sharing space on a Hong Kong-bound flight with his old colleague and boss, Goel. Goel's tenure was scheduled to end that month, and the colleague offered his congratulations on what most insiders believed would be a certain third extension of his service, which would allow the spy chief's tenure to run into the general elections and beyond. Goel smiled and told me his success was all because of the blessings of his seniors, the officer told the print. He knew this wasn't strictly true, the officer told me, because we hadn't had the best professional relationship, but he had probably forgiven my many arguments with him. The very next day, however, the government of India announced that Goel would be succeeded by Ravi Sinha, a St. Stephen's College alumnus and a Delhi-educated 1988 batch Indian Police Service officer of the Chhattisgarh cadre. Sinha is reputed to disdain the Ray-Ban Rambo culture that had taken hold at RAW. For the other key players in the Pannu case, the future may be a little less comfortable. Journalist Mahinder Singh Manral of the Indian Express revealed this week that Yadav was arrested on extortion charges in December, soon after the Indian government dismissed him from service in an apparent response to US demands. Now, Yadav cannot be extradited as long as he faces criminal proceedings in India, but he had to spend 4 months in jail before finally obtaining bail without opposition from prosecutors, I should probably note. Future diplomatic pressure could conceivably lead to a reversal of the bail or even fresh criminal charges. Who knows? Even as R&AW engages in inevitably agonizing and embarrassing debate about its future, the solutions might actually lie with politicians, not spies. Almost all major democracies have engaged in covert assassinations despite their illegality in international law. But Israel and the United States require the political executive to issue legally vetted authorizations and thus carry the can if things go wrong. India has no similar system. The lack of a legal framework protects political leadership from the consequences of covert actions that go wrong. Experts like the scholars Shreyas Shende and Rudra Chaudhary argue, reducing the incentives for reform and capacity development of our covert services. Faced with the brutal spotlight that always comes with spectacular failure, India's intelligence community will inevitably be tempted to seek dark corners to bury the truth. This, though, would only lay the foundations for future, even more consequential mistakes. Tough as the process might be, the time has come for thorough introspection and maybe even a little truth telling. I'm Praveen Swami, and I'm a contributing editor to The Print. Thank you for watching this episode of Security Code.